What is up, guys? Kyle Smith, Arizona drummer, and we are here with episode 2 of Behind the Kit. Today's episode is with one of my personal heroes, Mr. Gavin Harrison. Whether you know him from The Pineapple Thief, Porcupine Tree, King Crimson, his educational work, his clinic work, his session work, Gavin Harrison is known around the drum world as one of the best to ever do it. A master of odd times, a master of creativity, and infusing his feel and groove into everything he does. I am so honored and humbled to get an opportunity to sit down with him. I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation just as much as I do. Now, if you want to support the channel and make sure I can do more interviews like this, give you more content, make sure to subscribe to my Patreon. It's only $5 to join at the entry-level member, the snare drum level, where you get all kinds of perks, and then one layer up to $10 a month to join the drum set level, where you get shout-outs, Q&As, all kinds of stuff, even phone calls with me. So guys, thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, share this if you like it, as well as we did start a Behind the Kit podcast on Spotify. I'll have that link below, so if you want to work out, maybe drive your car, you're on a long commute, you're studying for school, whatever it is, you want to listen to these interviews and you can't watch them all the time, you now have another option to do that. So check out the podcast below. Thank you guys so much, and let's get into the video. What is up, everybody? This is Kyle Smith, Arizona drummer here, and I am joined by Gavin Harrison. Welcome to the channel, Gavin.
Hi there.
Thank you so much for making time to meet with us and talk a little bit about your experience with the instrument. I am absolutely honored and overjoyed and humbled to get a chance to speak with you. You are, without a doubt, one of the most inspiring drummers for my playing. My history has been in kind of the proggy side of things and odd time signatures and things like that, but making it relatable and digestible for the audience. So we're going to cover a lot today. We're going to talk about your artistic vision and process, your technique and rhythmic approach. Obviously, you're huge into education, so we have to talk about your legacy with teaching, a few other things, but I think maybe the best place to start is for folks who maybe aren't aware of who you are and what your background is. Maybe we just start with, how did you get started with the instrument, and kind of, kick off from there.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I started drumming when I was about 6 years old. I was doing dance lessons before that. And my father was a professional jazz trumpet player. He also played a bit of drums. So I tried to play the trumpet, me and my two elder brothers, and I was probably the worst of the three of us. I love the trumpet, but it's so hard. And, you know, when a friend of my dad's came round one day, his name was Freddie Adamson, he gave me a pair of sticks. My dad actually had a pair of brushes. He used to play along to jazz albums, just sort of playing on top of a magazine. And I thought that was great. That felt really good to me. And, there were always musicians around, coming round to visit. And, socially we would see musicians. And I just took to the drumsticks. I guess it was a replacement for dancing. And it felt natural to me. It felt like the right thing.
That's great. And, so you've been playing since you were really young.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what was it kind of like starting off and learning the ropes and then getting into, some of the incredible experiences and gigs you've had, over your career?
Well, I mean, my only ambition really was to just be a professional drummer. And I achieved that when I was 16. When I left school, I got a job. The kind of jobs I did for the first 15 years of being a professional drummer, you won't have heard of any of the people I worked with. Yeah. And I played in kind of wedding bands and dance bands. I played at holiday camps. I did casual gigs and demo sessions. And, I used to play for cabaret artists. Mm-hmm. And things like that, and the little things kind of slowly started clicking into place. My dad got me lessons so I could read, and I was kind of fascinated by odd time signatures. I think it was more just a curiosity because,
Yeah.
I would get lost playing in 3/4 when I was a kid. If we, sometimes I'd sit in with my dad. My dad we'd go to a pub and there would be a jazz group on and some friends of my dad, and my dad would get up and play. That was just normal for jazz. And he'd say, "Oh, can my son sit in?" And I would get on the drums, and then someone would say, "Let's do a jazz waltz," and I'd be like, "What's that?" And then it would be in 3/4. I'd get lost I wouldn't know where the one was after a few bars. So I got kind of curious. I needed to understand what it was, and it was a long time before I realized there were all sorts of time signatures. There wasn't just 3/4, 3/4, 12/8, and 4/4. I thought they were the only time signatures. So there were a few moments in my life where I suddenly thought, "Oh, what?" One of them was I went to there was a rehearsal every Saturday. There was a rehearsal of the National Youth Jazz Orchestra in London, where all the most talented young kids played. And I sat behind the drummer, and he sight read a piece in 11/8. And I looked at the music and I thought, what does that say? 11/8. What's 11/8? What does that mean? No idea. So that was a moment. Another moment of really kind of hitting me like a steam train. I was in New York in 1983 and I went into some of the music shops, around there, and I found a Steve Vai transcription book of Frank Zappa called "Shut Up and Play Your Guitar." And I stood in the shop and I opened it up and I was like, what? What's all this? So there are those moments, in the following year, a friend of mine bought me the official from Frank Zappa's, I guess his office, utility muffin research kitchen, or what it's called. You could buy official manuscript from him. So someone bought me the Black Page, which was of similar notation to what I had seen in the Steve Vai book. And I was getting really fascinated, like, what does a septuplet sound like? What does a quintuplet sound like? What does 11/3 sound like? What do these nested tuplets sound like? And I'd heard drummers kind of play them, and I could understand the mathematics of it. So if someone puts on a click or a metronome, I can subdivide it into 7, okay, and I can subdivide it into 5, and I kind of practiced that thing. But I thought, I really want to hear what this sounds like really accurate. And so a friend of mine, Dave Stewart, he had the very first Lindrum called LM1. This thing was like, I don't know, $7,000 or something in 1983. And he had it and he said, "I don't need it for a month. You can borrow it." So I took it home and I programmed the Black Page drum solo into the Lindrum. I understood the mathematics and I understood how you were meant to play these things. And so for the first time ever, I could actually hear accurately what 11/3 sounds like, or 7/2, or any of these other more complicated kind of tuplet things. And a very weird thing happened to me that about 4 years ago, when I was playing with King Crimson, the Zappa band were opening for us. So I got to meet Scott Tunes, and he is the guy, and Joe Travers, the drummer. Both of them know the Black Page inside out. And I said, "Hey, listen, I've got it. I had it on a cassette and I put it onto as an MP3 on my laptop." And I said, "Hey, look, for the first time in nearly 40 years, you guys tell me, did I get this right?" And it's hilarious because you can't really program a roll, so the rolls come out like a machine gun. And I'd faded them on the, when they were like, crescendos and decrescendos, I'd actually done it with the fader. So I played it to the two guys from Zappa band, Joe Travers and Scott Tunes, and they said, "Yeah, you got it dead right." So I was really pleased. It took me
Yeah.
40 years to get the approval.
But you
That
got
was
it.
my
Stamp of
fascination
approval.
with it. Yeah.
So this might be a silly question, but do you have a favorite time signature?
No, the time signatures are kind of actually irrelevant because the audience don't know where the bar lines are necessarily. And they, I could be playing in 7, but I'm thinking of it in 4. Or I could be playing in 7, but I'm in a time signature of 5/4. So none of it really matters. As Alan Holdsworth said, it's all in one.
Yeah.
It's all just
Yeah.
one. You know what I mean? And it kind of is. It depends how you think about it, and it depends if you give the audience any clue about what appears to be a 1 and what appears to be the backbeats. Of course, when we talk about backbeats, we're normally talking about in 4/4. Putting a bass drum on the 1, that gives you the downbeat, and a snare drum on 2 and 4. The rest of it, doesn't matter so much, but the audience will get a perception of 1, they'll get a perception of where the backbeats are, and they'll get a perception of the tempo. And of course, the real fun of odd time signatures is, well, you can't really, there isn't a 2 and 4 as such. You can make odd time signatures feel like they're in 4/4, and you can make 4/4 feel like it's not in 4/4. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you get into the idea of messing around with the architecture of rhythm, it gets very interesting. And in the 80s and 90s, I wrote a book called Rhythmic Illusions, which sort of approaches the idea of what the audience are expecting. And it's been my experience that if you want to play something kind of complex, you first need to establish for the audience where the 1 is and what the the subdivisions are. If you're playing in triplets or you're playing in 16ths or quintuplets, you need to sort of let the audience know what it is before you start messing with it. Otherwise, if you just start messing with it right from the beginning, well, you can do that, and then the payoff can be that you then give the audience the clue. But you have to know roughly what the people who are listening to it are expecting for it to be a successful rhythmic design, let's say.
Absolutely. And to kind of quote yourself back to you, you've said before that you don't play time, you play music. And I think to your point, like, that's exactly what it's about. We can all go, I have my ridiculous double bass drum set back here. We can all go back there and shed and have fun and do the crazy beats. But at the end of the day, you have to play for the song, and you have to play for, to your point, the best rhythmic design that drives that song forward. And I think that, and we're going to get to rhythmic illusions because we have to talk about it. But first, one thing, just a question that kind of ties into all this is, like I said, I'm a big fan of how you approach the instrument. I think it's creative. I think it's unique. But also your parts always sound composed, really well thought out. They're not just improvised. I've seen you improvise, and it is also incredible. But like, how do you approach that? What is your approach for writing drum parts when you're getting presented with some, whether it's a musical section, a riff, whatever the case is?
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky that I'm in a position where most people I work with expect me to do my thing. I have spent many decades playing for people where they will hand you a drum part more or less. Maybe they've programmed it, or maybe they've charted it. And a lot of songs just basically need what they are requiring. Sometimes it's a question of focus. If you're playing instrumental music or progressive rock music, I'm very aware of the point of focus. Now, when you've got a front man who's singing, you don't want to be kind of doing this behind him, playing things that the audience are like, I'm trying to listen to the vocal and the lyrics and understand the meaning, and you're putting me off by distracting me behind doing all this. So it's important to keep in mind the focal point of the song, and that would normally be the guy or girl who's singing and their lyrics. So I try not to do silly distracting things whilst they're singing. In progressive music, you do have a chance to write songs in odd time signatures, and at that point I try to think, okay, where am I going to put the bass drum and the kind of backbeats? You know, say we're playing in 11, am I going to do this like a kind of 4/4 beat with the end chopped off? I could play it as like a 12/8 beat, but just chop the last note off, but the audience will hear that kind of boom, boom. You know, they will feel that kind of 6 feeling. Or I could play it with, you know, a more 4/4 feeling, or I could maybe find another place to put the snare drum or snare drums. It depends how many. I'm talking about accented snare drum. You might want one per bar. If you put it somewhere in the middle of the 11, it might give you a kind of half-time feeling. If you put one near the beginning and one sort of 2/3 of the way through, well, this is kind of, you're into a nice area where you can mess around. It depends on the rhythm of the guitar, the bass, the keyboards, and the vocal melody. So it's normally quite apparent to me what I think I want to play. As Peter Erskine once said, someone asked him, how do you know what to play? And he said, well, what I do is I listen to the music, I imagine what I'd really, really like the drums to do on that, and then I do that. So sometimes you don't need to be sitting at the kit. You can just imagine, oh, I could do like, you know, a bass drum hit on one, and then maybe some other syncopated notes, and then put a snare drum on beat 5 or whatever, and then I can go to I know what it's going to sound like, so I go to the kit and I record that, and I'll maybe play 16 bars, and in that I might improvise a bit, and when I listen back to it, I sometimes think, I don't like what I first thought of, but I like what I did in bar 7 there. Let me look at that. There was like an open hi-hat and a couple of ghost notes. Oh, that's cool. So then I might play that for 16 bars and do some other variations. I'm always looking for a rhythm that maybe I haven't heard played before. I haven't heard a record with that rhythm on before. So in that way, it's giving the music some kind of uniqueness. I mean, we've all heard a million records with the bass drum on 1, snare drum on 2 and 4, and then the bass drum doing something else in the middle of the bar. Yeah. And that's great. And I like, if that's what the music needs, I will do that. And I'll just try to make it feel as good as possible. If that's what the music is screaming out for, then I will do that. I haven't disappeared so far up myself that I think, no, I can't play, you know, straight rock beat, because sometimes the straight rock beat is the best thing.
Absolutely.
You know, you've got to decide, and nowadays 99% of the time I have to make that decision on my own, sitting here in my home studio. I have to decide what I think is the best part for this song. And it's also true that I might listen to it the next day and think something else, or a couple of months down the road, or even whilst we're on the road playing the record on the tour, I might think, oh, you know what? I just had a much better idea. So I've even done that. I've even changed the drum parts during the tour, and sometimes there's a live album or a live DVD at the end of the tour, and you think, oh, you're playing it different to the record. Yeah, normally it's because I think I've found a better solution according to me.
It's funny you mentioned that. So one story, then a quick question. But I recently did one of those YouTube reaction videos, and one of the things I talked about was how you can apply your individual feel in whatever style of music it is. And so I chose 3 distinct drummers on purpose. One was Joey Jordison, rest in peace, and what he did with groove and metal. Another was Mr. Larnell Lewis on kind of the funk and jazzy side of things, but you were one of the other drummers I featured. And what I put in there was the modern drummer playthrough of The Sound of Music. I know that song. It's honestly a near and dear song for me. It's something I've listened to countless times. The way that you approach feel on that is second to none. But in that live run through, and again, it's for Modern Drummer Festival, so a little bit different, but some of the fills you threw in there, some of the double bass patterns, some of the kind of improvised cymbal flourishes, like that's, we all, of course, have a good time when we play live, but you can hear you evolving it and changing it and almost giving it a different life as you're kind of, performing it live. And so to me, like, that was a perfect example of here is, a song that already has captured, in my opinion, the essence of feel. And because it is a progressive rock song, but it feels, like it's straight time. But then you, in between all of that, add these incredible, cool, like just really cool flourishes and accents. And so for me, it comes down to balance, right? Of we want to try to make things complex, but also sound as simple as possible so the audience can digest it. And so for you, what has the balance been, or how do you find the balance between like the intellectual challenge of like, how do I apply the best rhythmic part, but also the emotional impact of whether it's for yourself, your bandmates, or the audience? How do you balance that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a song like that, obviously I played it 1,000 times.
Yeah.
And I got bored playing the same fills every night. And, sometimes I did play the same fills because I thought, this is a new one, or this isn't the same one as the record. I mean, when we started off on the tour, I probably did play the same fills as the record, and then I quickly thought, actually, I'm bored with that. I'll play another one. But the thing with the drum fill is it's got a purpose, and it says a lot about your personality, the kind of fills you play. And I think I know what the emotional impact was of some of those fills. If you have a fill which is, at the end of a verse or something, blah, just a flam on the 4. Well, you can do, a similar thing. You don't want to replace that with 30-second note run down all the drums. It has to have a startling stop. It doesn't necessarily have to be the snare drum. You could play double right on the bass drum or something, and it'll have that stuttering stop. You might do that for a couple of nights and think, no, actually the snare drum was better. I suppose it's a constant update of what you think is appropriate, what you think is hip, what you think is cool, and what you think is musical. I guess it's easier when you're young to just kind of blow your chops everywhere. I think later on, maybe I'm lucky that when I did do that kind of thing, no one was filming it or recording it and putting it on YouTube. So by the time I did end up on YouTube, I guess I'd already matured past a lot of the times where I would just maybe play too much or the wrong thing. I mean, it's hard to listen back to old performances because I can hear that was 2002, and that I can hear kind of what I was feeling on that day or in that period of time. And I was new to the band, and it was an exciting and foreign experience to be in a studio with them. It was the first record I ever did with the band, and we were in New York at Power Station, or Avatar, I think it was called then. And it was, I was in a certain frame of mind. I can hear that on some records, and I listen back sometimes and think, I wish I wasn't in that state of mind. I wish I could go back and do it all again. I don't really tend to listen back to records I've played on, because I just feel very critical towards them and probably think, oh man, I wish I could do that one again. But there we are. It is what it is.
Yeah, it's funny you just said something in there that I think is really not only interesting but just unique for us drummers, which is a fill can kind of show your personality. A recording can show, because I think, and again, I don't want to say anything ill of musicians, but I think for drummers, we can really put our emotion and what we're feeling and what we're trying to say. What I used to say growing up was the instrument of drums is the only thing it's the only language I can speak fully articulately. You know, it's something that I understand. It's something that when I hear other drummers play, I know what they're saying, and it's an expression. You know, and I think that, to your point, so I'll just tell you a quick story. I did an album back in 2012, and then I actually had my daughter right after that, so I stopped doing music professionally for, 12 years before I started doing it again. And I did another album. We recorded in 21, it came out in 24. And it's funny, you listen to the one in 2012, it's crazy double bass and blast beats, and you know, you're in your 20s, you're having a good time, and I listen to that and I'm like, gosh, I can't play that anymore, but then two, it just sounds messy. But even now I listen to the one I just did in a couple years ago, and even then I listen to it, I'm like, oh, I wish I would have done that differently, or what was I trying to say with that? Back to I think you said the rhythmic design. I love that phrasing, because what are you trying to say? What are you adding to the song? How are you driving that song? And we really do, as drummers, control the feel of that song and what it's going to end up feeling like to the audience. You know, we can double time it, we can half time it, we can odd time it, whatever it is, but that's what's going to eventually translate to the audience of what is this song trying to say. And so what you just said there was really, I think, eye-opening for me, just as you kind of look back on the language of drums, because I think it's more than just an instrument. I'm going to pause there, kind of see your thoughts on that, and then I have a question about, Porcupine Tree, Pineapple Thieves, things like that. But, what do you think about looking at drums or the instrument or even musicianship as a language that we all kind of speak and share with each other?
Yeah, I mean, you can feel people's personality. I've heard guys play on records, I thought, wow, I never ever want to meet this drummer.
I hope that's not me.
I can tell by the way he's playing all over it. This guy's got a massive ego, and he's not listening to the other guys. I can just feel his ego is at the front of the record. And likewise, or the reverse of that, I've heard guys playing, I bet this this girl is a really nice person, because I can tell they're listening, I can tell they're very generous. The great example of that is Steve Gadd, of course, who can still play something that really catches your ear, but something really minimalistic. And you can tell he's a nice guy, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It just comes across because of the way he plays, and the things he plays are hip, and they're interesting, and they're very, very musical overall. And he's just got such a nice feel, even when he's just playing quarter notes on a ride cymbal. You just think, wow, he's in a space in time that's so nice. I wish I could get in that space. I'm talking about his time feel.
Yeah.
When I used to listen to Steve Gadd when I was a young kid, and I'd hear him play swing, and I would, maybe there was a piano intro or something, the piano and the bass playing, and then when the drums came in, he would come in a space that surprised me, and I thought, oh, that's fantastic. That just immediately hits me. Jeff Porcaro was another good example of that he would place his time in a way that just felt like, oh, that's just the perfect place to put it. And that, even just playing quarter notes on a ride cymbal, or Jeff just playing a straight rock beat, you can tell it's Steve Gadd or Jeff Porcaro just because of their time feel. I'm not even talking about the rhythmic design part of it. So I've got that in my head probably more than ever now. I try to think of a nice rhythm to play. I try to think, is this a song I could do something a bit more unusual? Hopefully design a rhythm that you haven't heard before, or a rhythm that I can't think of any other songs with that rhythm, and then try to get that rhythm in a nice time space where it makes the music feel good. I mean, some of it is the people you're playing with, because it's, you know, you can't, if you're playing to a click, okay, the click isn't on the record. So the way the drums are feeling with the bass, especially, would mean that if you were playing with a really good bass player, you could find a space where the pair of you have got an agreement about where the time's going to go. And it's very hard to find a bass player like that who can have the same time feel as you and make it really kind of line up. That's fascinating to me.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'm sorry, I cut you off a little bit, but I couldn't agree more. I think, you know, I'm a studier of feel. Like, that to me is, you know, whether it's time feel, the personality of the drummer, whatever it is, like, one of the best compliments you can get is you put on a record, you might not know the song, but you know the drummer, because you're like, oh, I know who that is because I can tell just by listening to him. And I think that is, you know, back to the uniqueness of the style, but again, just that I think for drummers too, because it doesn't matter if the beat is super simple or super complicated, if it feels good, we're gonna hear that song and be like, oh, thank you for just again locking in like that, because it just resonates. You know, there's this understanding and connection, and it doesn't matter if you've heard the song a million times. Like, again, The Sound of Music I've probably heard at least 10,000 times, but every time I hear that open fill and then going into the little, you know, the hi-hat beat and the hi-hat rhythm, every time I hear it, I'm just like, oh, like, that just feels so good. And kind of like what you said with Steve Gadd, I'm like, why can't I write something that good? But again, it's because it feels good, right? Like, you can come up with complex parts all day long, but I want to be able to produce the feel that song gives me, and I think that comes into, you know, one of the things I think that you're a master of is displacement, metric modulation, and like the illusion of, again, creating that feel even when things are complex. I mean, and again, I'm not trying to over cheese you up here, so just know that, but it is iconic. It really, you do have your own sound that if you put on a record, I know it's you. But what do you think is a rhythmic device, and it could be time feel, it could be anything we talked about, but what do you think is a rhythmic device that drummers today are underutilizing in their approach to the instrument?
Ooh, well, I don't know. I mean, I think a very large part of the personality thing of designing something is also the sound that you make. I see a lot of YouTube clips and I think, well, the guy's playing something really good, but the drums sound horrible. They really sound like a load of cardboard boxes, and that's such a shame, because the part he's playing is quite nice. In the end, I think it all comes down to your personality. The sound you make on the drums is a sound, it's not really belonging to the drums, it's belonging to you. So the sound is in your head, and you make the drums sound, you project that onto the instrument that's in front of you. We've all got preferences about which drums and which heads and which sticks and tuning and miking and muffling and all those things. And you try to make your sound be the first thing that someone recognizes. Even people who aren't musicians kind of appreciate when there's a really good drum sound. And if it's got a nice feel as well, then you're way past the 50% point of this being great. And then on top of that, if you can think of a good drum part and some good drum fills. But what I've realized more and more is that the sound that's in you, you make that happen through the way that you hit the drums. And I've proved that many times when I've done recording masterclasses, and I've had students come up and play my kit, and we've recorded it and gone in the control room and listened to it, and how different they make my drum sound without changing the mix or touching anything. How different they make my drum sound. That's quite a big lesson in itself. So, you know, when people ask me, what do you recommend young drummers to do? I always say, just work on your timing and your sound. You should probably work on your reading. I don't know what kind of music you're into or what kind of employment you want to possibly venture into. It has been invaluable to me to be able to read, and it's been invaluable in the way that I've managed to learn very complex songs or program the black page into a Lindrum. Even if you're not the greatest sight reader, but you can, you know, pick up a copy of a magazine or a drum book and think, I know what that sounds like just by looking at it. You can read it and you can hear what that sounds like. Maybe, I don't know how many situations people are in where they're asked to read anymore. There's a kind of difference between being a professional drummer and being a drummer who just plays with some friends or on a non-professional basis, or you're just a band member. If you want employment, and you might, you know, if you're starting off and you want to work on, you know, for an artist, or you want to go on the cruise ships or something, you're probably going to have to, you know, sight read. And it's an important skill. And I think all of it has had an influence on me that I can imagine drum parts. I can even see them. I can see what they look like written on a stave. Sometimes I lie in bed and I can actually imagine a drum part and I can see it written out. So sometimes I think, oh, I must try and remember this. Sometimes I've even got out of bed, got a piece of paper. But this is a great rhythm. I'm going to work, because, you know, you wake up the next morning and think, oh, I can't remember it.
Yeah.
So it's a great way of recording your ideas. Of course, it was the way of recording music for hundreds and hundreds of years. Before the tape machine or the wax cylinder came along. This was the recording. You just wrote it down as an instruction on a piece of paper. And that's amazing to me. So I was very happy that I did learn to read. It was very abstract and surreal to me at first, because I was already playing. I'd already been playing maybe 3 years before I had my first kind of official drum lesson. So when, you know, my drum teacher, Joe Hodson, when he got a piece of paper and he started making little dots on a light, I'm like, what is that? You know, I know what you know, it was so abstract.
Oh, yeah.
In the days of when I was playing in King Crimson, I would write out charts, some of them very complex, hard charts. And because we were sitting at the front of the stage, the drummers were at the front of the stage, you know, there's no way we could have had a big music stand there with all the paper there. Of course. During rehearsals, there were music stands, but we knew that ultimately we'd have to go on stage and know the stuff. So we would rehearse a lot, and I would learn the songs, and then we'd go out on tour and play them, and they would go into a different place in my mind. They would just become this sort of musical melody, if you like. And maybe sometimes there was 9 months off in between one tour and another, and I would get my charts out to refresh my memory of the song, and it suddenly looks so abstract. It isn't how I remembered the song when I was on stage. You know what I mean? I think it was originally, you know, when I was sitting in rehearsal with the chart, and then after about 10 rehearsals, I thought I better start not looking at the chart, and I could almost remember what it looked like a sort of photographic thing. But as soon as we got on stage and played it for a few nights, all that went away, and it just sort of internalized and became this melody thing. And it was very weird to go back and look at the charts. They like, oh God, did we play that? It looked so abstract to me. And it is an abstract idea. I know some classical musicians, they started day one, their very first lesson on, let's say, cello. They have a cello teacher, they get a cello and they put their finger on this string, and then the cello teacher puts the piece of paper on the music stand and says, look, this is the note you're playing. So you immediately identify that mark on the stave with that note on the cello. And that is, from day one, you make that association with the music and the instrument. And I didn't. And a lot of rock and roll instruments, let's say, guitar and drums and bass, a lot of people start off just by jamming along with records and playing for fun. So they don't grow up with that association to reading. And you can come at it at later life, and it's very abstract, the concept of it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's taking like this, and again, I cannot sight read, but I can read, if I have one in front of me. But to your point, it comes from a place of you're taking this almost like raw passion and emotion in the rhythmic instrument we play, and you're putting it on paper to help almost like articulate it. And to your point, to memorialize it a little bit of like, this is something that I believe in. I want to make sure I play and I understand it. But I do agree with you. The value of sight reading, which is something that I'm trying to, now that I'm back into being professional again, trying to get better at, is it's invaluable, because again, you never know if you get the call, hey, I need you to come in and play this festival or arena show, whatever it is, and you don't know the songs, but they have charts available. Like, that's your way. My experience has been of you plug in the headphones, you make your own charts, right, and then you go and you do the thing. But to your point, if you can read it just for the artist, which again, back to employment, for the artist employing you, for the band you might be a part of, for whatever the event is, if you can come in, take the resources you have and perform, and they don't feel a difference, the audience feels great, the artist you're playing with feels great, and it's like you've been playing with them forever. Like, that's one of the values, I think, of being able to have that resource. And there's a lot of resources out there for us as drummers, but that is one of the primary ones, because again, we can read it and play along, and if you understand it. It's funny, when I first took my drum lessons, same thing, there's the different quarter notes on the different levels to indicate the different drums. You have your X's for hi-hats, and so I'm like looking at it, I'm like, how am I supposed to, there's only so many lines, I've got so many drums, so and taps and accents and, triplets and all, you're looking at it, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is overwhelming. But once you kind of can read it and understand it, it does become back to the language. It's just another form of, it's writing down the language that you would normally play, just like we would write down this. But it does bring me an interesting question, because you mentioned King Crimson. Obviously, Porcupine Tree is where I got to know you from, but then the Pineapple Thief as well. Honestly, 3 just incredible bands. But I am curious how your process has changed between those 3 different brands, and where your role might differ, whether it's in creative weight, how you write the material, how you approach it. I'm just curious to hear kind of how you look at those things differently and go into them a little bit differently.
Yeah, well, I sort of don't. I apply the same method to all those bands and any session I might do, which is the same thing. What could I play on this piece? What could I possibly do? Okay, I could play, maybe I'm listening to a song where a drummer has already played on it, or maybe I'm listening to a song that has a drum machine on it. I could, of course, play what they did. Robert Fripp always had this idea of play each piece as if it were new, regardless of when it was written. So in King Crimson, of course, I had to go way back to even the 1969 record. And Robert's like, learn the song, but don't learn the drum part. And that's very hard when you're a drummer, because like, how am I going to write a chart when I'm sort of deliberately not learning the drum part? That's quite quite an idea, but I like that idea a lot. I like that idea. So some nights, even in Porcupine Tree, even like 2 years ago when we were on tour, we're still playing songs from the early 2000s. And it's like, well, why don't you just think of it like you've only just heard it yesterday? Forget what you did 23 years ago and see if there's another path or another way to go for it. But as with any piece of music I approach, I try to make it as musical as I can and have a theory about what kind of rhythmic design I could make for this piece, bearing in mind the focal point, which might be the melody played on a guitar, played on saxophone, played on any instrument. So not necessarily the vocal, but it might be a melody. And, sometimes you need to design a part that just stays out of the way.
Yeah.
Just stays out of the way. Still functions. You're still giving a tempo. You're still identifying the groove and the downbeat and the backbeats, but just stay out of the way and don't play busy. And other times where you think, I could really go for something in this section. I think I could play something much more interesting. And you sort of slowly find a solution to your problem. And it is endlessly fascinating because you always think, what if I just run out of ideas? Where does creativity come from? It's that old chestnut. Where does creativity come from? And what if I go there tomorrow and there's nothing there? The well is empty. I've used every drum rhythm I've ever thought of, and now I've got nothing left. But really, when you just listen to the music, the ideas should, if the music is inspiring, should trigger something in you that excites you and causes you to come up with something new and creative. I think the really interesting part is the very seed of the idea. Once you've got the small seed of an idea, well, then technique and experience can kick in, and you know how to extrapolate that seed. I can play it in 5, I can play it in 7, I could do it in half time, I could play it on the ride, I could do it on the, then you start thinking of all the variations. But the very seed of the idea might come from, one of the other instruments. It might come from the vocal. It might come from a sound that just reminds you of something else. I think it's a very comfortable feeling when you think, oh, this reminds me of, what's that Peter Gabriel song? Oh, yeah. And then you start playing, and then maybe a couple of days later, you listen to that Peter Gabriel song, it's nothing like it. Sometimes it's just the vibe, it's just, what I was trying to recapture was just the vibe that I felt when I listened to that Peter Gabriel song. Not the tempo. There's sometimes I think about Hearts and Bones, right? It's a Paul Simon song from about 1983 or something. And Steve Gadd plays on it, and it's got a vibe. Now, sometimes that vibe might come to me, completely different song, completely different tempo, might even be a different time signature. But I just think, oh, I've got a feeling like Hearts and Bones here, or I've got a feeling like a song that I really love from a different band in a different style. I think there was a Porcupine Tree song where we were thinking of a new section, and I remembered a Yellow Jackets song. I love the Yellow Jackets, and I remembered this song they played that suddenly goes into like a halftime 5. And we were sitting in a rehearsal room, and I said, hey guys, I've got an idea. And I played this kind of halftime 5. And of course they joined in, and it sounded nothing like the Yellow Jackets at all. And I never mentioned to them, oh, this, I kind of stole this idea from the Yellow Jackets. Maybe they wouldn't even know who the Yellow Jackets are. It's irrelevant at that point. It was just a rhythm that something in the music I thought, oh, I can just imagine that section of that Yellow Jacket song, that rhythm. And sometimes I might even try to persuade the bass player to kind of play a similar rhythm or a similar vibe to the thing that I'm trying to copy. But, the reference points are so varied, no one would guess in the middle of a sort of death metal Porcupine Tree song, I was actually thinking about, a jazz quartet called the Yellow Jackets. That's just an example of something where the vibe is something, it's a memory, it might be, I was describing to someone the other day, I used to listen to this Randy Crawford album called Secret Combination, and it was 1980, and I just got my first car. And whenever I was working in London, there was a road I used to drive into London, and you used to come over this kind of flyover bridge, and then when you get to the top of the bridge, you can suddenly see London. It's a bit like when you're in New Jersey and then you see Manhattan. It's kind of an exciting moment. Wow, there's London. And I had a cassette with this with two Randy Crawford albums back to back, and it just brought back an emotional memory of that time and the vibe of some of the things that Jeff Porcaro in particular played on those records. And 30, 40 years later, something in that might reappear in a song, in a band, in a style, nothing to do with Randy Crawford or the way Jeff played drums, but it just, that memory came back to me, and it might give me the first seed of creativity, and from that I've got enough experience and technique to do all the variations of it that might fit a certain song.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree with you more. There are so many songs, rhythms. It's kind of like a smell, right? You have a smell and you're like, oh, I remember this, or it's the same thing, Really, just a quick story. I used to work at a restaurant here. This was, 15 years ago, and I went back to the restaurant the other day just to have dinner, and I'm in the environment, the music's playing, I'm smelling the smells, I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm, right back here where I used to be. But it's those things you can draw from, these experiences, and back to the language, right? Like, I'm taking my experience and I'm sharing it with you through the way I can express it. And I think that you have to do the work, to your point of like the expertise and the ability to play. You have to be able to do the work, so when you have these seeds and nuggets, you can turn it into something, which is kind of an interesting segue. And I know we're getting a little close on time. I'm not sure if you have a few extra minutes past 11. Okay, perfect. I won't hold you too long, I promise. But a perfect segue into rhythmic illusions. So I mentioned we can't not talk about it. I think when it came out, and again, I'm not trying to cheese you up here, but I think it blew all of our minds. Just to look at how you approach the instrument and just the way that you, again, take a rhythm and create the illusion with it and that feel part of it. But, I have kind of a two-part question. So the first part of that is, looking back on that, and maybe any of your other, DVDs or books that you've put out, what is a nugget of information or knowledge that you think is still really prevalent even in your experience today? But then secondly, what's a concept or lesson that you think drummers often misunderstand at first? So they maybe hear it, they get the concept, but they think it's one thing, and then as they get more experience, they learn it's something else.
I don't really know the answer to that one, but the rhythmic illusion stuff kind of came out off. It was what I was thinking about in the late 80s, because I'd heard some records, one particular record by Salif Keita. He's an African singer, and his band played some rhythms that I just couldn't understand where the one was. I would mishear the downbeat, and I would think, God, this is an amazing rhythm. And I'd listen to the same song the next day and I'd think, no, hang on, maybe the bass drum is on beat 2, and that would put the snare drum there. Oh, and then I could re-listen to the song from a different offset, a different displacement. And there were some songs where I felt like I could hear the song in two different ways. I could hear it, especially the mix up between triplets and sixteenths. When you start hearing triplets, but you think they're sixteenths, or vice versa, you start hearing the downbeat in a different place, and you start hearing the backbeat in a different place, and then you realize, oh, it's just triplets, and I'm hearing it in 3/4, but actually it's 4/4 triplets, and it's a bit faster than I thought it was. And I remember going to see Salif Keita play in London, and I was watching the feet of the guitar player and the bass player, and a lot of the stuff was in triplets, and I'd heard it in sixteenths. So I got fascinated with that kind of thing. I'd heard people on record play things that I thought, I don't understand what's going on here. I'm hearing it in a really weird place. And there'd also be that thing where you just turn the radio on in the car, and then you hear the downbeat in a different place just for a few seconds. You think, oh, why is the snare drum on 2 and 4 and? Oh, that's really good. And then the guy will play a fill. You think, oh no, it's just 2 and 4. I heard it an eighth note out.
Yeah.
And there's lots of good musical examples of that. And then later, when I started writing some of these things down, I thought, oh, okay, well, if you're hearing it like that, maybe the guy was actually playing it like this, or maybe he was actually wanting it to sound like that, because that's kind of cool. And so I would start writing a lot of examples of things that I'd misheard, either the downbeat as a displacement, or I'd misheard the tempo as a metric modulation. So I started categorizing what could be a displacement and what could be a metric modulation, and I'd heard Vinnie Colaiuta play things like that. I'd heard Simon Phillips play things like that, and Billy Cobham. And I thought, I really want to get to the bottom of this. So I was writing a lot of things down, and I got interviewed by a British drum magazine called Rhythm in the late 80s. And the guy said, if you've got any ideas for a column, I said, well, funny you should say that. I've just started developing these ideas about rhythms that are kind of, odd in odd places. And a bass player friend of mine, Marcin Elliott, said, that's a rhythmic illusion. I said, oh, that's a great name for it. I'll call it Rhythmic Illusions. So I wrote a column for the magazine for, I think, about 3 or 4 years. And as the 3 or 4 years went by, my ideas kind of developed along the way. And then, of course, I'd finished that book by 93, 94. And of course, since then, I mean, that's 31 years ago, I've had lots of other ideas. I wrote another book called Rhythmic Perspectives 3 years later. But you know what? I could probably write another Rhythmic Illusions book with like 100 more things in it, because ideas have come to me since those days. But at the time, there wasn't anything like that. And I met Bill Bruford, and he said, I showed it to Bill Bruford, and he said, you've really got to put this out as a book. And he helped me eventually get a book deal to release it. So it was a really nice thing to do, and it documented what I was thinking about from the late 80s to about a 5-year period, from about 88 to 93. The things I was thinking about. And it's actually been very useful, especially in progressive rock music. Sometimes in a creative situation, I could say, well, look, if you guys carry on doing this riff in 5, I'm going to sort of play this thing in 7. Or if you guys go into 4, I'll go into 4, but I'll be an eighth note out, or a dotted eighth note out, or something, and it will create this illusion. And Steve Wilson always liked these suggestions. As I said, sometimes let's start with a rhythmic illusion, and then, like, when the vocal comes in, or when the piano comes in, the guitar, everyone will realize, been hearing it the wrong way round. Ah, great. So it became useful as a compositional tool.
Yeah.
I used it a lot on my Cheating the Polygraph record. I made a record, a sort of big band record with a arranger called Lawrence Cottle, and we used a lot of metric modulation and displacement as arranging tools. So in a creative band, you can actually find quite good uses for those kind of things.
Absolutely. And then again, it goes back to connecting with the audience. And I think, excuse me, sorry, but when your audience is musicians, they're going to appreciate it on a different level. But even the common listener is going to hear that and be like, oh, okay, that feels, especially when it resolves, oh, okay, that feels good. And they can connect with it. So you can kind of, again, that balance we talked about before of like, I can be creative and complex, but I'm also going to make sure that it feels good for the listener. So I think we have time for probably 2 more questions. Like I said, I won't hold you hostage. But the first one I have is because we're talking about how much you've learned since you put the books out. What do you think? What are some things that you've learned about yourself just from playing on the kit for the past few decades, and how would you compare your maybe approach or your lessons learned today than where they were when you were again starting out and kind of learning to play the instrument?
Yeah, I mean, I always, when I get round to recording, especially complex drum patterns, I always think, man, I wish I'd spent more time working on my timing. Your timing could always be better. It could always feel better. You always play something and think, yeah, that's all right, but if I had a few more hours or a few more days, I think I could make that feel better. Having a studio at home, of course, sometimes I spend a very long time working on songs because I do have the time to spend 5 days practicing one section, it's always, if you're the idea that you have, can you play it really well? Well, sometimes you have a new idea and you can't play it really well. So when I think the first Zoom camera came out, I don't think it was, I had a little recording device about 2006 or 7. I had this little video camera. This was before iPhones or any cell phone could record video. I had this little video camera, and when I was jamming on the drums, sometimes I'd play something I really liked, or I had an idea, and I would just turn this video camera on. I would explain my idea to the camera, and then I would try and play it. And I've got hundreds and hundreds of these little films, and I play most of them quite badly because it was the first time I ever tried to play it. And that's fine. I recorded the idea, and it's good to record it on video because you record the tempo and the attitude, and you can see the things you're hitting. If you just write it down on a piece of paper, and I've done that a million times too, when you look back at that a few years later, you kind of think, I can't remember. Okay, I can see all the notes. I can't remember the tempo I used to play this at, and I can't remember the kind of attitude, the eyebrows, as Frank Zappa would say. I can't remember what eyebrows I had on when I thought of it. So the little camera, and of course now I do it with my phone. I will set up the phone, and of course it sounds terrible down the phone, but it's just to capture that moment where you play something and you think, oh yeah, and if I had the hi-hat going in 3/16, but you can barely play it, but I just got to get it down before I forget it. I can then, over the following weeks or months, I can practice it and try to get better at it. I mean, the quality of the ideas and the creative ideas you have can sometimes be ahead of your technical ability. I don't tend to have ideas that really feature crazy fast double bass drum because I didn't grow up listening to metal and speed metal. So when someone plays me a song, I don't normally imagine super fast double bass drum, which is just as well, as I can't play it. But you kind of imagine things that are at least in your universe that you probably can play. You just might not be able to play them very well straight away.
Yeah.
It's exciting to think of a new rhythm, get on the drums, think, oh, I can just about get through it, but it's really rough. Okay, well then I'm going to work on it for a week until then I might even write it down and work on it until I can actually play it pretty well. That's something that I probably spend more time doing now than ever. And I'm always kind of annoyed and frustrated with myself that I didn't play it really well straight away.
I know the feeling. Like, to your point, I'll come in here, I do the YouTube stuff. Gosh, sometimes I'll be in here like 3, 4, 5 hours just trying to get the right feel. And when I first started doing YouTube, I was like, I just got to get videos out. I mean, it doesn't even matter if they're good. And I wish I didn't do that, because there's, now dozens of videos from 2020, 2021 that are just really not good. And so, it's like, really make sure you're honing and you're practicing. And I think a common theme through all of these interviews is the importance of doing the work and putting in the work and practicing and practicing and practicing and playing with others and learning and listening, learning to listen, all those different things. But I'm going to close up with one more question. And this question is really for you, which is, what's going on in your life right now? What are some things that you want to share, whether it's musically, education, touring, whatever it is? What are the things that we want the folks watching at home to learn about? And then also, just for the folks that are watching, I will link your social medias, your videos. I'll link all that stuff, your webpage, as well as even some of the things we talked about as far as the different books, DVDs, education, just so people can take advantage of the things that I've been able to take advantage of in my youth. Again, back to resources. But again, I'll kick it back to you. What should we be looking out for?
I've just completed this record with a Canadian guitar player called Nick Johnson, and the album's called Early Mercy. And I played on one of Nick's albums, I think 2016, 2017. I thought, this guitarist is really good, really, really good. And then I played on another record of his about 2 years ago, which still hasn't come out. And he said, you know what? I'd really like to do a project with you where we write together. So I would send him ideas, different kind of drum ideas that I've got, some patterns and some vibes and things, and he would write songs around them, and he would write compositions. Then when I've heard the composition, I might even go back and change the original thing, I tweak the original drum part. But it's come out really, really nice. I think that's coming out in July.
Okay.
And it's a trio album with a fantastic bass player called Evan Marion, amazing bass player. And the three of us, Nick plays keyboards as well. And that has been a lot of fun and very different for me. I like to get involved in things that are a little bit different. I recently have just completed a musical version of Macbeth, written by a very, very good Australian composer, and he contacted me. It's for the Royal New Zealand Ballet. It's very classical, but actually the writer, Christopher Gordon, he can write some really heavy metal riffs. And it's been one of the most challenging projects I've ever done. I mean, some of it is like 1940s Gene Krupa, fast, big band stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then some of it, I'm up on the China cymbal going as fast as I can on double kick, playing like metal stuff in odd times. He's got me soloing over these kind of prog riffs, and it's been amazing. And it's very, a lot of it's orchestral, very unlike anything I'd ever done before. It's been, quite a challenge and I was glad I wasn't in a room with an orchestra trying to sight read it. I'll tell you that much. that's how long it's been since I've been in a sight reading situation. And with sight reading, it's a skill you need to keep honed.
Yeah.
And, he would send me these PDFs, these written charts, and I would try to sight read them. And like, oh, wow, I'm going to have to think about this for a minute. I'm only glad I'm not in a big studio with an orchestra and a very expensive sort of schedule going on. I would have been pretty embarrassed. But anyway, I tried to, apply the way that I normally approach any music, and it's been a lot of fun. That was an incredible project to do.
And is that accessible now, or is that live?
Oh no, that's. No, I don't know when that will see the light of day. I believe the performances with the ballet company are not taking place until next year. And later this month, Bruce Sword is coming round, and we're going to start writing a new Pineapple Thief album, and we'll probably be out on tour late next year with a new record.
That's great. Do you think you'll come stateside as well?
Oh yeah, I hope so.
Okay. Hopefully Arizona. If not, I'll have to come out and find you somewhere. But yeah, when you come out, I'll make sure to stay in touch and come see the show. And I'm a huge Pineapple Thief fan, so new album, I'm like, let's do it. I can't wait to hear what rhythmic designs you put in there. And I know we're quite a few minutes over, so like I said, I won't hold you hostage. But what I will say is this has been an absolute honor for me. Like I mentioned, I'm just kind of recently getting back into the professional drummer landscape, and to be able to sit down with one of my idols, heroes, and yourself has just been a true honor. So thank you for making the time. You've been so great, flexible, and just really great to talk to you. I've learned so much even in this conversation. And like I said, hopefully we can do this again in the future, because I'm sure we just scratched the surface on some of these things. And like I said, when you're on tour, I'll make sure to come see you and support you and see you live.
Great. Thank you, Kyle.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.